Sweating.
Hello, Charmaine.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very hot actually right now.
Oh yeah, the studio is very intense.
It's good. This is kind of probably my ideal environment to play in. You know, like terrible rock band practicing upstairs, like sweating, small room. My best friend from college is here.
Hi.
From Japan.
From Japan, all the way from
This is
Japan.
really good vibes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we're really embracing this intimate session here. Yeah. So tell us about yourself. Introduce yourself to this new group of listeners.
Cool. My name is Charmaine Lee. I am originally from Sydney, Australia, and I moved to America about 9 years ago. I studied my undergrad at Princeton University. I pursued a degree in sociology, and then decided to pursue music more seriously. I'd never had a more intense. I wanted like a more intense formal training, and I ended up going to New England Conservatory in Boston, and I had dreams of being a jazz singer, like a modern jazz singer, a la Gretchen Paletto, and and at school at NEC, I took a very, very hard left turn, and that was thanks to a couple of faculty there, which I can get more into if you want to hear about that. But generally, this is where I'm at now. I moved to New York about 2.5 years ago, and I work full-time at this arts nonprofit. They're called the Asian Cultural Council, and they give grants to artists traveling to and from Asia and America. Hey, a friend of mine is here.
We heard a knock on the door.
Yeah.
Now we're opening the door.
Oh, sick. Oh, cool.
Hi.
Oh, hey, we're
Say hi
live
to the
right
world.
now. Oh, sick. Okay, that's
Cool.
really cool. There's a puppy here as well.
Yes.
He's not.
Teddy's really...
Yeah, he's really chill.
He's really chill. He loves...
I was worried when I was getting into the, screech. But he seemed pretty chill.
He loves a huge dynamic
Yeah,
range of
yeah.
sound.
I imagine, yeah.
Yeah, so I think voice and vocal is a really interesting medium instrument, as we can say it. So tell us about how you kind of discovered voice as your medium.
Well, I was always singing, and as I said, my I had dreams for a long time of being a modern jazz singer, and so I was always using my voice, but it wasn't until at school, I remember this very distinctly, I had my first week of school, we had these like ensembles that we had to sign up for, and I remember looking at the pamphlet, and it was like, on the left it was like music of the 1920s, like big band music, like modern jazz, and I was like, you know, like whatever, this is like kind of boring. And I saw this ensemble that said the Free Music Ensemble, and it was led by this guy, Joe Morris, who's an incredible guitarist, and in the description it said, like, you know, we'll study the music of Braxton and Eric Dolphy and Steve Lacy and Ornette Coleman, and I knew all these names, but
Roscoe Mitchell.
Yeah, exactly, Roscoe. I knew all these. You're a teacher. I knew all these names, but I didn't know. I hadn't done a deep dive, and so this ensemble was essentially just learning that music via the playing of it, and under the tutelage of Joe, who has played with a lot of these musicians and understands deeply the process and some of the methods that they apply to this kind of the variations of within improvised music / free jazz. And so I became pretty obsessed, like very, very quickly. Ornette Coleman had a huge impact on my life. The album Science Fiction, specifically, the record I've waited all my life for you. You know, that, like, track, when I never forget when I first heard that, like, I just had the most overwhelming emotional experience. I just, like, broke down in tears and was like, holy crap, music can sound this way. That's insane. And, like, I became obsessed, and then I worked... I decided to work one-on-one with Joe because he had this methodology, this sort of meta methodology to improvise music. And I was really fascinated by it because it actually requires a lot of discipline and rigor to something that seems totally abstract and seemingly random. And his kind of like approach was very much about trying to create a language to talk about this music that it does exist in this like very kind of abstract space, and trying to create a language to unify people who come from all different kinds of, you know, all different kinds of backgrounds, you know, like the conservatory trained kid like me to like someone who is just like, I just play whatever God tells me to play, you know. And it was kind of an interesting, it really kind of, to me so far, the most compelling way to bridge those kinds of differences so that you can actually like create something really special together in the moment. And so I became really obsessed with it, and I studied with him one-on-one. And in terms of the vocal stuff, you know, I was using a microphone, just a normal dynamic microphone in my jazz, because when you're in a conservatory, you're playing with like prepubescent teen boys who are just like playing as loud as possible, like right. all the time. And so I just had to use it as a mechanism, like my own weapon or something. But then I think naturally working with Joe, he was really amazing at helping me synthesize a lot of my different aesthetic interests. You know, I was at the time very into obviously free jazz, but I loved experimental electronic music. I loved, you know, like Bulgarian women's choir, classical music, new music. There was like all these different realms that I was really into and that were really inspiring to me. And working with him was really fantastic and very helpful in just helping me synthesize those things. But I was using the microphone and at first like in this like very functional way, and then I became like really into the sound of both the microphone and the speaker, right. and how much I could access and how much it helped me tap into this range of electronic vocabulary that right. I was really inclined towards. And so that was happening, and then also, and I think I've started to write an essay about this, like this idea about space and how much that influences what we create. And for me, at school, nothing is soundproof. Like, doors don't even close. You know, it's like so janky. And I always felt like a second pair of ears were listening to me all the time. And it's so hard when you're using the voice and you need to just like break the wall of just like the consciousness, the self-consciousness that happens when you're using this kind of instrument that's so direct and so personal and so universal. And I remember I couldn't do it without feeling this like hyper consciousness that like 6 people were like listening around the corner. And this moment like changed my life. There was a room at NEC that was like tucked away on like the second floor behind like the organs or something. It was like a random occurrence that I found this room, and no one used it ever. And it was like totally isolated. And I remember I found that room, and the school's open 24 hours if you can get in like past a certain time. And I would just like go in there at 11 o'clock at night and just like sit in the room and just be like, you know, just like create, just push through the initial stages of self-consciousness. And that kind of really opened up my sense of confidence and my imagination as to what was possible with my voice. So
you found your voice.
Yeah.
And you found very interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting acoustic space.
Yeah, exactly. So it predominantly did start very acoustic. Like a lot of my music at the beginning was just that, but then my love affair with amplification was happening at the same time.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think I love voice vocals as an instrument because essentially you're not like other jazz musicians. They play woodwinds or percussion. You're dealing with basically something that within yourself. You have to kind of reveal that, kind of really put your vulnerability out there and just, you know, deliver what you want to say. And also using a microphone that kind of opens up many other possibilities.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because when I first started, I was taking my initial reaction was to take a very emotional approach. So, like, it became initially a vehicle for me to sort of channel rage and, like, sadness and joy and all these complexities. But I realized, like, very quickly that was not interesting to me, like, after a certain point. Because it was like, I don't want to create... Like, the voice is so instantly... every single person is going to relate to it in some form or another, that I didn't want to continue like trying to dictate like or reduce what that would feel or be emotionally. I really do believe in like emotional subtext, no matter how abstract or intellectual that you get. I really feel the importance of that presence and considering that and setting yourself up so that shines through no matter what you do. But I was initially starting at the point of that. And I remember my mom saw me play at the Stone. Like, my first ever show at doing this kind of music was, like, at the Stone, which is very
East
funny.
Village one? Or?
Yeah, the original. And my mom was in town, and she came to the show. And after... Cabela's laughing. She was... After the show, she came up to me, and she was like, has something, like, traumatic happened to you? You know, like, and I realized very, like, it is so, and I've had, like, initially when I first started playing, like, people would come up to me, like, crying, like, you triggered this, like, really traumatic experience in me, and I, like, you know, like, that's, like, really moving, but that wasn't, I didn't want to dictate that, you know, like, I wanted to just, and so I naturally moved to a much more methodological approach, much more sort of, like, conceptual and intellectually driven, that were largely steeped in traditional forms of music, like harmony, thinking about rhythm a lot, range, pitch, timbre, all of these things. And the more I sort of gravitated towards that approach, the more I let my inner personality and the freedom of my emotional complexities kind of like shine through in the music. Yeah.
So that leads to another thing that I want to talk about. This boundary between kind of the so-called experimental music and regular or other music. Like right now, we're in a radio station that
Right.
play mostly dance music,
Okay.
ambient music. So people were talking about, oh, Chamberlain, you were doing, or Charmaine, you were doing all these crazy sounds.
Yeah.
And for me, this idea of, you know, audience engaging a certain form of live performance is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea of active listening,
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
is very, it's something that I've been thinking about all the time. Because in different situations, you're always kind of engaging in some way. But for kind of experimental music, you're trying to train the people or to pull people in a way.
Yeah.
But it seems like a lot of problems that I've been dealing with is people don't really get what I'm saying sometimes.
Yeah, it takes a certain openness, I think. It takes a certain open ear. And I think it also takes a little bit of persistence, right? Like, I think I really do believe it's exposure that matters. You know, like to truly draw someone in, they have to be open, but they also want to be able to be there frequently. Because what happens is they start to understand, like I did. You know, like I remember when I first heard Merzbow, I was like, what the hell? Yeah. Like, I mean, it's triggering something. It's like triggering this like deep response in me, but I don't know what this is, and it like freaks me out. Yeah. But over time, like, you realize that there's a deep like artistry and expression to it. And like these kinds of musicians and these kinds of artists, you know, they may not come out of like whatever training that's been formalized, but they're working with their own systems that they've created over time, and it's really deep. And I think there's like a lot of things you can learn from that.
And it's been practicing for so many years.
Exactly. There's something to be said about that. Doing this thing over years.
Yeah,
you know?
So I think we are here talking about this is very important to let more kind of merging more audience together is very important. Yeah. And another thing is, so we talk about acoustic space.
Right.
Now I kind of want to talk about time and this idea of people listening to music. And we are performers. We're kind of engaging, or in a way programming their memory, right? So they have to kind of cultivate their listening over time instead of listening to one thing and say, I choose not to engage with it. Right. So, so time is a very interesting thing, and when you're improvising, you're dealing with time in a very, very fucking direct way. Yeah. Like,
oh, we can swear on this station?
What?
We can swear on this station?
Yeah.
Oh, sick.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah! Just kidding.
So imagine when you're on stage.
Hi, Mom.
So you're improvising by yourself, a soloist. You're right there dealing with real time. You know, you have to be in real time. Yeah. That's something that is very, very hard.
Well, that ties into the active listening, right? Like, this is why I do it. Yeah. Like, it brings me to the ultimate present moment, and it forces me to focus. It doesn't matter what the hell is going on in my life outside it. It forces me to be absolutely present. I do think I do have kind of a moral feeling about it. I think there is some integrity that lies behind, to me, like truly compelling improvised music, and it is just like the true commitment to the moment. And I think a lot of people don't realize this. Like, improvised music, there really isn't such a thing as like successes and failures in this kind of music, because to me, that's all part of the process of being present and of being live. You are just like witnessing somebody problem solve live and commit themselves to that exact moment. And I thoroughly enjoy the whole journey, because that is kind of what the experience is as an audience member. Yeah. But I do think of time I often think of time as a kind of thread that you can, like, as the manipulator, as the performer, you know, you can like scrunch up in a ball, you can like thin out, you know, or stretch. Yeah. And I often think of very sensually when I think of time and like how I engage with it.
So time is changing all the time. and also as improviser, kind of breaking the void of time or.
Yeah, it's the most fun when you're not. I mean, my favorite kind of music tends to be not on a grid, you know, like it's not set in. Unfortunately, I mean, we're talking a techno station, but it's not really set like in like a fixed grid, right? And I think what that then what happens is it frees you up to really push what that feels like, time, right? Like space, silence. Yeah. Engaging with like these kinds of like very powerful kind of like an on and off switches and approaches to playing with that time when it's not just like floating over something else that's like much more fixed.
But I think there's a beauty in techno music too, because in a way it's kind of hypnotic. There's
like it's a threshold that also you reach.
This
beyond.
idea of, you know, I mean, minimalism, like Le people, but techno is kind of building on top of that, and you're trying to express certain ideas using the layers of the kind of fixed grid of time.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan of time. I mean, like I come out of jazz, and I think that if like playing over changes and playing over time is like one of the greatest. I'm still working on that in my private like space. You know, it's like I never forget that. And I do think that actually, like when you eliminate the grid, people often think like, oh, it's like you're just in the open ether, this field of openness. But actually, and what I've learned over playing these past few years is like you fall into your own grid no matter what. Like it doesn't matter if there's like a beat behind you. Right. Your phrasing will tend to become. You'll start to embody like. Kind of familiar ways of phrasing in silence, and for me, I'm always trying to break that. So systems do develop no matter how much you try to like break free of them. Yeah.
So silence is very, very loud in a way.
It's huge.
It's
the most underrated.
So for people
strategy.
For people who are listening right now, just take a moment, just be quiet, just, you know, silent, you know, experience that, or, you know, try to experience that for 5 minutes in your day, especially in New York, and listen and kind of experience yourself in that environment. So I think silence and improvised time and improvising time and also composition kind of come in line with each other, right? So how do you relate your improvised music or your improvised session into your composition, or is it a total different thing?
It's a very good question. I am not convinced yet that there is a compelling way to create like how do I say this without like pissing off a lot of people?
I don't know. This is what we're doing here.
No, that's not my point, because I think it's nuanced. But I would say that like I don't know if I've yet really seen a compelling way to write music that is like quasi-improvise and quasi-compose. Like there's often improvisers will use this sort of like middle strategy where it's like do this general gesture thing and then move to this general gesture thing, and like that's the score. And honestly, like it becomes this like you get trapped in this middle zone where the performer is not totally committed to the current moment, but they're also not really operating. Their box is very limited as to what they can do in that exact moment.
Okay.
And it's also just like not really like, you know, like I enjoy composition that's actually very precise and that is like very intentionally made. And I often feel like that middle ground I've yet to really see like truly compelling ways to do that. And so for me as an improviser who's being commissioned now to like compose for ensembles and stuff, like what I did, my strategy for the last group I worked with, which was a new music on string quartet called Spektral Quartet. They're based in Chicago. they asked me to do something for their next album, and I was thinking a long time about what would be interesting and compelling for me in this current moment, without my just like creating an entirely new way of translating my music. And my strategy ended up being, what if I actually just taught these musicians how I learned to improvise?
Right.
Like, what if the composition I leave them with is actually just a performance practice that they can then just take with them wherever they go? Yeah. And so, I mean, it was like very ambitious, and we only had like 2 weekends to do this, but it was really interesting because basically all of the time the score was actually just like, this is how Charmaine makes music, and we're all going to just like do that together and find the spaces that feel really good and record that. But whatever iterations happen following that is never going to be that piece or the same thing. So
do you believe this idea of connection when you're improvising with other musicians, or when you're playing music in real time with someone else, sometimes things just come together. Yeah. And sometimes things kind of fall apart. But, you never know. There's no middle ground.
It's live problem solving. That's how I really think of group improvisation. And it's highly social. And I think that's why I really gravitate towards it. At school, I was learning Joe's methodology is basically, when you're improvising, this is group improvisation, but when you're improvising, you're in one of 5 different states. You're either in unison,